And that's my next topic. I really want to complain about this radioactive contaminated water in Japan. I mean, it's not just limited in the United States. I mean, Japan also has a so-called Western democracy. They have election, right? So that's the same deal. China is furious about this, and it's got very little coverage. If you look at the coverage, it's all about, oh, China is overreacting. Okay, China doesn't believe in science. Let me show you what science they're talking about. I really want to get this right. So they are referring to this IAEA report. So this report is called, as you can see, IAEA review of safety-related aspects of handling ALPS treated water at TEPCO. TEPCO is the Tokyo Electric Power Company. ALPS, I think it's called an Advanced Liquid Processing System, something like that. It's a treatment, water treatment thing. And then Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Station. So this is the report they're referring to. And they're saying, oh, IAEA approved this whole thing to let the water is fine because IAEA approved it. Let's see what IAEA really said here. You see here. The view expressed here do not necessarily reflect those of IAEA member states, although great care has been taken to maintain accuracy of information contained in the report. Neither the IAEA nor its member states assume any responsibility for consequences which may arise from its use, okay? And here, the mention of names of specific companies or products, whether or not indicated as registered, does not imply any intention to infringe proprietary rights, nor should it be construed as an endorsement or recommendation on the part of IAEA. You see, that's what the science they're talking about. They are constantly referring to, oh, IAEA, endorse this or support this. That's not true. IAEA has, you see that, right? And why do you think, don't you think it's very strange? Okay, you did this whole report, and then you're saying, don't count on us, right? This report doesn't take any responsibility, and we don't endorse anything. Don't you think it's very odd? And the reason for that is this. There has been a report about bribes. Japanese government paid bribes and corrected the IAEA report. So this is what's happening. Japanese government paid bribes to the IAEA. And of course, IAEA took the bribe apparently, and they did modifications. Here it says nuclear contamination, Japanese government paid blah, 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 etc. right? And here is what they did. The report was extensively modified according to the intentions of the Japanese government received in advance. A demand for additional amendments stating no discovery of tritium was made. Why do they want a particular tritium not being made? Because remember, they talked about this ALPS, this advanced liquid processing system, which removes most of the radioactive contamination with the exception of tritium, which means their treatment does not take out tritium. And I read actually not only tritium, but actually there are other elements, radioactive elements that also the treatment cannot take out. What the Japanese did is they don't even test them. So if they don't test them, you cannot say those water has those radioactive elements. That's what they're doing. What is really frustrating for me is that this whole thing gets so little coverage in the West, other than blaming China for overreacting. And you said, you just saw what the science they're talking about. There is not much science. If there is any science, the science should be independent, right? IAEA should be an independent. Not only IAEA said, oh, we don't take responsibility for any of that. The numbers in their report, if you read it, it's all coming from Japan. They don't have an independent sending people there, taking samples and do the test. It's all the already made the numbers given to IAEA. So that's how this report was about. That's why they say, oh, we don't take any responsibilities. Don't count on us. Essentially, that's what this is. But how come the Western government no one complaining about this? This affects us all.
Shows that environmentalism has become politicized. You can imagine that if China were doing the same thing, the U.S. environmental organizations would be going crazy. We'd be hearing all about it. Now, I don't know enough about the science. I do have a lot of friends who are big supporters of nuclear power, and they maintain, well, this is not actually dangerous. And I don't know. I just don't know. You know what I mean? But what I see here is a blatant bias that because China is opposing it, because Japan is doing it, U.S. media doesn't highlight it. And the so-called environmental movement of the United States conveniently looks the other way and has decided not to make an issue out of this, which if it was done by other forces, they clearly would. And that there is a political aspect of this. I mean, Joe Biden in his letter that he wrote to his article that he wrote for Foreign Affairs, basically announcing his presidential run in 2020, he said America must lead again, and he specifically went out of his way to say that he wanted to stop China from building power plants across the developing world. That's one of the things he said, is that China building power plants in the developing world, we have to stop this. It's a threat to the environment.
Because it's bad for the environment? Is that what he was saying?
Yeah, that's what he was saying. And that, I mean, they very much have weaponized the environmental movement against China and against the developing world. That's very, very clear. And then there's instances like this where there's things that they choose not to make an issue out of. And so I think that's what I take from this, is that the environmental movement, which is paid for by the Ford Foundation and, the Rockefeller think tanks, and I mean, you can go down the line. I mean, I think the World Wildlife Federation was started by the British royal family, if I'm not mistaken. And that they have an agenda. I mean, they have an agenda that is a political and economic agenda rather than simply wanting to preserve nature.
Yeah, and two things. One is Zaporozhye. Remember Zaporozhye nuclear plant? Everybody was screaming, okay, what if the Russians going to bomb it? Why would the Russian bomb it? Anyway, but it's going to be catastrophe, the world will end there, almost something like that, right? And then here you have someone is actually discharging nuclear radioactive water to the ocean that affects us all. Ocean is floating, right? It's not just outside of their own doorstep. It's actually around the world. And nobody said anything. But Zaporozhye, it's not, it's going to be, catastrophe. The other thing is Chernobyl. I want to bring it up. That's also a lot of discussions within the Chinese social media, etc. Chernobyl is also an accident that also have a similar problem. Is that once it happened, so the nuclear reactor is still working. It's still doing its stuff. That's why it's radioactive. It still come out. That's what happened with this in this incident. Well, Chernobyl, what Soviet did was to send people. Basically, it's a suicide mission to turn it off in order to contain the contamination, to make it as limited as possible. Japan didn't do that. So that's why their nuclear reactor is still working. It's still having nuclear radioactive things coming out. And because it keep on coming out, so it's getting hotter and hotter, and at one point it's going to explode. So that's when they inject water inside the nuclear reactor to cool it. That's why it's not nuclear wastewater. It is contaminated water. Wastewater is to cool down from the outside. But in this incident, they actually injected water inside, and they're still doing that to cool it down in order for it to not explode. Instead of what Chernobyl did is they really should have sent somebody in to turn it off. They didn't do that. All right. You see, remember the Japanese are totally fine when they do World War II to have suicide missions to lock themselves into airplane, and then the airplane go to attack the U.S. Navy, the U.S. ships. They had no problem with that kind of suicide mission. But to protect the environment for their own sake and for the world's sake, they can't have some suicide missions. This is so incredible. And the thing that's infuriating to me is that Blinken is the one always talking about value. Remember, he's always talking, wherever he is, he's talking about value. And everybody is saying the Soviet is evil, blah, blah. But Soviet in this instance did take responsibility. Okay, they did all they could. They sent in their own people a suicide mission in order to contain the contamination. Japan, the so-called Western valued country, did this thing so awful, and nobody said anything. I mean, what kind of, this is so hypocritical. This is so infuriating to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right.
And it's not, I guess because I watched a lot of the things on the social media for the past few days, it's just that, and then of course the China is, there's a lot of is conspiracy theories also, which I may or may not believe, but one theory is that this whole thing is target China to destroy Chinese like fishing industry. China has a huge fishing industry, okay? And once the water, everything is contaminated, China will, there won't be any fishing industry, okay? Yeah, that is one theory of it. And And then, of course, the other thing is, oh, only China reacted. Well, they don't report Korea also. Korea government is quiet about it because they don't dare to say anything because US doesn't want Korea government to say anything. But the Korean people are protesting right now, and there's no report about it. And there's also many Pacific Islands, they're also directly affected by that. They also are protesting. Again, nobody's reporting about it. So this whole thing is just, and here's my question. Are we even living in a capitalist society? Because I thought capitalist is you take the risk and you get the reward. But if it doesn't go the way you want it, you take the responsibilities, you take the loss. But more and more like now, it seems to me like in this incident, the Tokyo Electric Company, they take the risk because they were cutting corners when they built the plant. Now, we wouldn't have even this whole mess wouldn't be existed if they did the right thing, but they were cutting corners. And that's why when there is an earthquake, it got damaged. That's how the whole thing started. It's the greed, the old fashioned greed. And then when they make mistakes, we are all the ones, including you and me, everybody, we have been taking the consequences. They don't. But when they're making money, they take the earnings, they take the profit. We don't take the profit. I don't think that's even capitalist. And remember 2008, what happened to the banks? Those bankers, they've taken record numbers of payment, profit in a good time. And when things happen, who is bailing them out? The US government, using our tax money. I mean, are we even living in a capitalist society? I thought even capitalists are not supposed to work this way, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's when people talk about socialism for the rich. I mean,
yes.
It's an analogy that's used. I mean, it's not exactly right, but this understanding that yes, the sink or swim, you're on your own, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, doesn't apply to wealthy people. It applies to the working class. It applies to small business owners, but the very wealthy, they get protected, and the government protects their monopolies. And that's one thing that you get a lot of libertarian folks in the United States that say, well, we just need to have a real capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
We just need to have the government keep its hands off and have a real free market. But I show them throughout history, you've never really had a true free market throughout history. The government has always worked to help the rich and powerful. And if you have a small group of people that have way more wealth than everybody else, why wouldn't they try to use their power to rig the government to make sure it stays that way? And that it's always been that way. And that's one of the flaws. There's a lot promoted in the United States of, well, if we just privatize everything, if we just adopt truly free market policies, everything will work out. And that's an illusion because, I mean, there has never been such a thing. That the government has always, been rigged to help the rich and powerful. And the idea that you're going to have a pure free market that's purely competitive, that's just not going to happen. So if we're going to have a government intervene, why don't we have a government intervene on behalf of the people against the big corporations? So
yes, absolutely. Yes. A new movement is more needed than ever. When every day now you look at what happened in Hawaii, I mean, that's just a huge scandal. It's incredible what they're doing there. They're blocking people from escaping. I mean, for land grab, it's just ridiculous, the things going on. And in Tokyo's case, is this Tokyo Electric Company is in the end, it is the Japanese government is taking over, using the Japanese taxpayers' money to first bribe the IAEA people, second, and then they spend more money on PR than the money need to be spent on storing these water safely. They spend more money on, they put it on budget on the PR because they know this thing looks bad, right? So there's all kinds of information piles on, that there's something wrong with the water, because why do you need a PR? If the water is so good, why don't you just drink yourself? Why don't you use it in your own swimming pool? Why don't you inject it in your own inner, lakes, etc.? Why do you have to dump it in the ocean? It doesn't make any sense. And in the meantime, the West saying, oh, you're not respecting science. What science are you talking about? So that's a big topic in China. I just want to update everybody because nobody in the West is covering it. And the way they're covering it is all China's fault. And China is hysterical, no science, and only China. Okay, that's just not true. Okay, that I just want to throw it out there for whoever is interested. Yeah, and you can use that to talk about the decay of the capitalist system. It simply is not a capitalist. It's just not.
Right.